Welcome to another edition of Save Your Sanity Livestream. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, and today my guest is Dr. Larry Waldman. He's been a podcast guest and has an upcoming episode on the Save Your Sanity podcast. So I invited him to talk about something that he's written a book about, but is also very important to the topic of toxic relationships when they come apart. So welcome to the show, Larry.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about it because we're going to talk today about how to focus on loving your children more than you hate your ex. And, that's me stealing the very clever title of your book, which I just love. The title of the book is Love Your Child More Than You Hate Your Ex. But it's such an important thing to shift your focus in that way. And it does so many good things for you. So before we talk about how to do that, I wanted to ask you about something that you wrote in something that you sent to me. And you were writing about how we have to think about that maybe divorce can be due to getting into relationships too quickly. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, I can't agree more. In my close to 40 years of clinical practice that I did, I'm sure I saw at least 1,000 couples, and typically in the first, or certainly by the second session, we always talk about how it is that that this relationship formed. That's a good idea anyhow, because we'll talk about the time at least when they liked each other, if you will. It never ceased to amaze me that on so many occasions, what I heard time and time again was, well, we met at a party, at a bar, at a dance, or whatever. We were intimate within the first or second night, and we moved in together within 90 days. I've heard that so many times I can't count it. And the issue there, as far as I'm concerned, is that what I believe happens is we get emotionally connected, physically, if you will, connected, romantically connected, and so on. But we lose sight of the very important basic issues that portend whether a relationship is going to last for the long term. Issues like, of course, values, morals, how do you manage your money, how do you deal with your anger, how willing are you to compromise, those kinds of things. Those kind of get lost in the shuffle. We may see little hints of some of those issues, of course, but we dismiss them because I'm so infatuated with him or her, and let's not forget how good they are in bed. So we'll let that slide. And of course, what happens is down the road, those issues play significant roles in the relationship, and it begins to struggle.
Yes, and I would add something to that because I think in the same way. So I would add something to that is that there's also the factor of things are going so well romantically, emotionally, sexually, all of that, that I don't want to rock the boat. I hear those things that don't quite sit right, and they kind of portend that that could go sideways. But I love what's going on here, so I don't want to rock the boat by bringing up money or religion or values or culture or what could possibly go wrong in the future that would be good if we addressed it now.
Exactly. The irony is that this is probably the time, not probably, it is the time, of course, to discuss these kinds of issues when things are going well, if you can do it in, of course, a constructive manner. But yes, you need to do those things. As I say in my current book, I recommend a number of things, like check your prospective partner's credit rating, or have them show it to you, and so on. See how their family functions, and so
Yes.
on. That's important. To see how their parents deal with each other, and so on. That's important data, because obviously most of us live what we learn, and we're likely to parent the way we were parented, and in many cases, unless we work on it, we're likely to be married the way our parents were married, good or bad.
Yeah, we're on autopilot in so many ways that we don't realize from our early learning, our early conditioning, what happened to us before our brain was fully developed. And we've taken those things in, and if we don't question them, if we don't take them out and turn them over and have a look at where did this come from and do I still want it, well, we'll just run on those autopilot things. And those are very important conversations to have. I absolutely agree with you. And yeah, run the risk of it not going well, because that just portends that the relationship in the end won't go well anyway. So if you can't get it together to ask the tough questions in the beginning, repent at your leisure later when you're trying to take it apart because it didn't work. So another piece that you said, and I quoted this from you, you said 20% of divorced parents knowingly or unknowingly do things to traumatize their children. And I think these are important pieces, how we get into a relationship, how we've been lacking in our willingness to examine what's really going on and ask tough questions. But also, if we're thinking of divorce, many people have come from a home where there's been divorce. So there's going to be some learning that's taken place there, some fears, some disappointment. But when you're talking about traumatizing the children during divorce, what kinds of things should we watch out for?
Well, there are a number. Basically, as I like to say, that what happens in this segment of divorced couples, the anger and the frustration that each parent may have essentially supersedes, if you will, their role as a parent, and that they let that anger spill over, and that in that way, of course, the kids see that frustration and anger, and of course, in and of itself, it's traumatizing. They, of course, the number one sin, obviously, that we see most often is when parents speak badly about the other parent. I mean, remember, from the child's perspective, this was the best dad in the world and the best mom in the world, and as far as they were concerned, the best marriage in the world, because what did they have to compare it with? And all of a sudden, this marriage has broken up, which is traumatic in and of itself, because now children will feel abandoned, scared. What's going to happen to me? If daddy divorced mom, is daddy going to divorce me too? Is a question I used to hear a lot, and so on. But at the same time, what now the child is hearing things like, well, wait a minute, not only was the marriage apparently not the best in the world, although I thought so, but now I'm hearing bad things about one parent or the other. Essentially, then the child doesn't know what to believe, and basically their world is turned upside down.
Yes, and further on that, just to add another piece of that, another wedge that's in there, is when one parent is really feeling that they have no one to talk to, they will often, and sadly, and please don't do it, turn to talking to the child. Now, they may not be bad mouthing the other parent, but they may be making their child into their counselor, into their confidant, and saying, it's been so terrible for so long, and I feel so sad. And a child has no idea what to do with that. All they
Exactly.
know is mommy or daddy is unhappy. And what do I do? Are they unhappy with me? And particularly if they're under the age of 7, they're concerned that that generalized unhappy is, I must have caused that. And even as they get older, they get very concerned and revert back to that time, because the person who is supposed to be stable in their life, who's supposed to be holding it together and showing them how to do it, has just shown that now they're turning to me, and the child doesn't know what to do. And we take away the children's childhood when we do that.
I was just going to say that it's a total confusion of roles. The child steps out of the child role to basically becoming a peer. And they will do that, of course. Kids will take that, but in the end, it's damaging. And that's part of the unknowing things that parents do. The parent isn't doing that maliciously, but they're in so much need that they go to their child. Along those lines is some parents actually will kind of ask their kids to do some reconnaissance, if you will. See, when you're over at dad's house, let me know if there's a new TV or what's new there and so on. And of course, what's the child going to say? Oh, no, mom, I'm not going to do that. That's inappropriate. Of course, the child's going to do it. But at the same time, now they're caught, they're caught in a loyalty squeeze. Do they remain loyal to mom who's made that request? And by the way, it works both ways. Dads do this too. I don't want to pick on moms here. This is an equal opportunity, unfortunate situation.
Mistake.
Right. Uh, but the child is caught in this loyalty squeeze. To whom am I to be or remain loyal? And
Mm-hmm.
that's something we do. We also sometimes use our child as a messenger. And more often than not, it's not good messages we're sending. It's bad messages. Like, where's the child support? It's late. Since now and of course, when typically dad gets that message, he responds poorly. I can remember a case I had not too long ago before I retired from active practice, where the father, in fact, had been censured by the court for bringing the child home late on a repeated basis. So, nevertheless, the father and son are out for their weekend visitation. It's now 8:15 already, and they're still a half hour from home, and the return time is 8 p.m. Dad knows he's in trouble, so he takes the cell phone. You're in the car, racing to get home. Hands the phone to mom, excuse me, to the boy, and says, "Call your mom and tell her we're going to be late." Now,
Triangulating.
now think about that. Can you imagine what's going on in this child? He's 9 or 10. He knows what's going on. He knows that when he's on the other end with mom's not going to be happy with him and so forth. But can he say, "No, Dad, I'm not going to do that. You're putting me in a terrible spot"? So reluctantly he does. And he gets mom on the phone and says, "Mom, we're a little late. We'll be home about 9 o'clock." And mom, unfortunately, is frustrated and so on, and loses it and starts yelling into the phone, "Your dad!" and starts, and this kid breaks down. I mean, he's
Yeah.
absolutely caught.
Or,
Between the
or mom doesn't say that because she recognizes it's not the child's problem. And then she unloads when the child gets home about how awful the father is. And this shouldn't happen. And your father promised. And, did you dilly dally? What made this a problem? And this is never, I mean, I'm never going to let you go to your father's again. This is ridiculous. And I'm going back to court. And that whole conversation, Larry, becomes just one that the child fears. And
Oh,
yet they'll be put in that situation frequently.
sure. Yes. Oh, it's those kinds of situations that again, it's not that the parent is doing it maliciously. They're just not thinking of the child's perspective. Again,
Well, I
they're
hope
caught up.
after today they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, again, if you think about it, the basic definition of a parent is one who puts their needs secondary to that of the child. We all do that as parents. We give up sleep. We give up our time. We give up our energy. We give up money. I mean, a lot of things, of course, go into good parenting, and so on. But some of that gets lost in the anger and frustration that an ugly divorce engenders.
Yes, and we get to a heightened awareness where we're just exhausted. We're so tired of the ongoing struggle and the ongoing power struggle and what feels like unfairness and injustice and all. And so we just get into that groove and it wears thin really soon, but often it goes on way too long. So let's take that trauma and hope that we've prevented a little bit already just by these couple of things. And I want to talk about the positive direction of how to love your child more than you hate your ex. Because if you've been through all this and you've had the heightened awareness, you've had the difficulties that come with the separation. And with my clientele, these are people who are leaving toxic relationships with toxic partners. So the co-parenting is still going to have to go on, and it's still a prickly situation and always will be. So I think this is really pertinent to them in particular, is how to keep it top of mind that you want to love your child more than you hate your ex. How do you start moving into that shift?
Well, great question, and that's so important. A couple things. First off, we have to hammer on a number of points, and we can't just say it once, twice. I mean, we have to say it regularly, of course, depending on the age of the child. But statements like, "This was not your fault. You had nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
You were not the cause of this. You did nothing wrong. This is again not your fault. You will not be abandoned. We both me and your other parent still love you. You will have contact with both parents. You will not be abandoned. Your needs will be taken care of." Those are important points initially to stress to children, because of course
Mhm.
that's what scares them. Obviously on a secondary level, but important, we want to try as much as we can to reduce the number of changes. If we can keep the child in the same school, if at all possible, do so. Sometimes, kids unfortunately are going through all this mess that we were previously talking about it, and on top of that, they get yanked out of their fourth grade at one school with all their friends and are plunked into another school on the other side of town where they don't know anybody. That alone would be enough to knock a kid off his legs, and so on. But on top of that, and so on. So you want to try to do that if possible.
Mhm.
Also, again, if possible, uh, hopefully the child can remain, at least on a half-time basis, in the home, that they know, as opposed to being, again, placed into, in some cases, two different home situations. Um, so one with the one parent, and then when the child visits the other parent, of course, that's a new situation as well. Speaking
Hmm.
it makes sense that when the other parent has left and is moving to a new residence, the child should be able to visit that residence to know where that parent is going. It's not like they're dropping off the end of the earth, and that they will be there and there is their room or there is their place that they will go and be when they come to visit.
Yes, I mean, all these things are giving the child confidence that they're being included and thought about and not discarded, not displaced. They're being maybe moved around, but not replaced. And then there's another factor that we have to put into this too, which is what if somebody is moving in with a new partner? And we have that kind of trauma that can happen to the child. So not only are they moving to a new home and to a new school, but then there's another parental figure that they don't want, even if they might like that person as a human, they do not want as a parental figure in many cases. And how do we deal with that dynamic? So that's another whole thing that we have to understand to take care of reducing trauma.
Oh, unequivocally. And of course, that gets back to what we were talking about previously about how quickly we form relationships in the first place, and how quickly we reform relationships following a divorce. Uh, I remember I took a workshop, oh gosh, more than a decade ago, on divorce and so on, and family study or custody studies, and there was a very experienced family court judge speaking at that time, and he said something that I'll remember forever. And what he said was, it was his experience that at least half the time, he said half the time, when people are coming to sign their final divorce decree, they already have a new partner on their arm.
Well, yes, and if you have a toxic partner, one of the things that a toxic partner cannot be without is what we call supply. They
Sure.
have to have their needs met, they have to have new supply. So they've been grooming supply before they ever left you. And so you can feel replaced within 24 hours in some cases, where there is new supply and a new story. And, one of the awful things that happens for children when they have parents who are leaving a toxic relationship and divorcing is that they are in the situation of having to go to a place where there's a story being told in the new relationship by the toxic parent that favors the current supply as opposed to the parent of the child. And that gets very convoluted for children. And that new supply wants to believe that they are the smarter parent because the toxic parent who's divorced badmouths the mother of the child or the father of the child they left. And so in order to do that, they've had to tell a sob story to the new supply about how awful it was, how crazy their ex was, all of these things. And so the dynamic in the new home is even more toxic for the child. So very,
Absolutely.
very difficult.
It for the child. I mean, and again, you're absolutely right on. I've seen it so many times. I mean, the separation occurs. They're not even legally divorced yet. That could be, in some cases, a year or more off, depending on how ugly that gets. But next thing they know, here comes Uncle Bill or Aunt Susie or whatever, and it's like what the message is. Wait a minute here. Are parents like Legos? I mean, do I get to do we interchange them here? On a week's notice. I mean, Dad used to live here, and now he's gone, and here's another man in the same bedroom with Mom. How did all this happen? And what message does that send the kid? It's like, oh yeah. So yeah, I often say to parents, please, of course, do not bring another party in for as long as possible. Certainly not within the first 90 days.
And another lethal thing that happens in the toxic endings here is not only will they bring a new supply in, but they'll bring in the new supply's children and treat them better than they treat their own children. And so they set up a dichotomy, and the new supply and the new home looks like Disneyland, but they're kind of onlookers as opposed to being included. They walked into a new complete situation where the idea is that we're in the love bombing stage. Everything is wonderful. Everything is going to happen in the new situation in a wonderful way. Oh, so very, very difficult. So let's just move on to something that I do think is important for us to talk about is if we're going to shift to loving our child more than we hate our ex, do you think it's a good idea to begin doing that long before you get a divorce?
Oh, of course. Long before? Well, depends on the age of the child. I think the child should have a heads up. Yes. Uh, Depending on the age, because if we start sharing with our child that I'm thinking of getting divorced, that with like a month before, I'm afraid the child is going to obsess on that and not let that go.
No, I wasn't
I would
meaning
give.
giving them the divorce information. I was meaning, okay, you
I,
know within yourself that you're leaving. You know that this is not going well. I think there's real wisdom in making an internal shift in yourself to say, okay, I'm going to put the child's best interest first over how much I don't like my ex. I'm going to stay focused on creating a good environment for the child, even though I know I'm leaving, and start that focus early rather than taking the risk of going down some of the paths we've spoken about early and making them into a confidant or any of that. So if I could start that shift in my thinking earlier, that, okay, I'm going to do the best I can for my children, as opposed to spending all of my emotional energy on how much I don't like my partner.
for sure. In fact, yes. I mean, I would hope they would be doing some of that even beforehand. But yes, the focus again needs to be on helping kids, get through this difficult time, and and assuring them, that they are loved and that they are cared for, and so on. Uh, Regardless, of course, when the time comes, there's going to be upheaval, and any change for the child is going to be difficult. But if the child knows that it wasn't their fault, they weren't bad, they're going to be attended to, they're not going to be abandoned, and all those things, they can make it. Kids are pretty resilient, particularly when they have that
Mhm.
kind.
So, what would be your suggestions if someone's listening to this and they say, oh, that's a better focus? What would be your suggestions to someone for maintaining that shift in focus to, I'm going to focus on loving my child more than I hate my ex? How can I keep that front and center in my mind once I've made that shift?
Is to keep doing what, like you said, what you're doing. I mean, showing that you care, addressing the kids' needs, and so forth. Uh, Again, you're not probably going to share you're going to leave, but if the kid is feeling secure in that relationship, that of course can only help them, when the time comes and they get that bad news, if you will. It's still going to be a bit traumatic because remember, kids don't know a bad relationship from a good one, at least before 10, 12 or so, because it all looks the same to them. And remember, they don't have anything to compare it to. So when they get the word that mommy or daddy are leaving and so on, and they're going to be living apart, yes, it's going to be difficult, and you can expect them to be upset for some time. But if we avoid some of those sins that we talked about earlier, they'll get through it. I mean, let's face it. Divorce is unfortunately a rather common occurrence in our society. So millions of kids grow up to be adults who went through a divorce and survived well.
Yes, and I would add this to the conversation that once there is separation, physical separation, and there's custody, child going back and forth between parents. One of the ways that you can love your child more than you hate your ex is when the child comes back to you, when it comes back into your custody, that you focus on the child as opposed to where they've been. So you're not asking questions, you're not interrogating, even if you don't mean to, you're not looking for information. You are focused on how are you feeling? You know, um, let's have fun. And I call that transition time. And I always tell my people, plan transition time as a low stress time. Don't have that shift in custody from one home to your home. Don't have that be, okay, get in the car, we got to go somewhere. Allow the child to have transition time, which is, you maybe simply low-key activity, a half hour in the park with some crayons, throwing a ball, going for a swim, sitting on the edge of a river, going home and having nothing particular to do. Allow the child to go through whatever they need to within themselves by just being received in a loving manner when they come to your home, not being concerned about where they came from.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely right. Yes, welcome the child, focus on them, express that you hope they had a good time. Not ask questions. The word interrogation is absolutely, I can't tell you how many kids use that word, that when they come home, they detest it. They get interrogated, and because the parents are looking for something. No, and so on. And the other thing, of course, that shows the kid that they're being loved and that everybody's okay is to indicate that you hope they had a good time and you want them to spend as much time as possible with the other parent. So the kid feels, oh, that's okay. It's not like, teen mom against teen dad. Yes, it's mom and dad, but there still is a connection here. I'm part of that connection, and it's not like I have to play one off the other and so forth. You're right on there.
So some really good points. I hope everybody has taken something or what you need or what would be of value to you from this conversation. My guest today is Dr. Larry Waldman. You can find him at topphoenixpsychologist.com. You want to find his books. You may want to read the one Love Your Child More Than You Hate Your Ex, because it will help you kind of stay focused on what's more positive and a way of being. Thank you so much for being with me today, Larry.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
So I often do these Facebook Lives with people who have been guests on my podcast or upcoming guests on my podcast. So know that in a couple of weeks, you're going to hear a podcast episode with Dr. Larry Waldman, and that will give you a much more in depth look at what it is that he's up to in the world and all the wonderful contributions that he's made. So you can find him at topphoenixpsychologist.com. If you are watching us on YouTube, you are on my channel for relationship help. If you are listening on Facebook, know that you can always go to that channel on YouTube. There's over 500 videos there for you. And I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. You find me at forrelationshiphelp.com. Always here to help you. Happy to do that. And new clients have the opportunity of a full 1 hour session as an introductory session for only $97. You can find that at beaclient.com. And so that's also there for you. So much there for you and so much good information from Dr. Larry Waldman. Glad you joined us. Glad you're listening to the replay. Put things in the comments if you have questions. I check there and I'm happy to answer. Until we speak again, take very good care of yourself because you're precious. Talk soon.